So welcome to all of you. This is an experiment for Allan and I with our project that we call Hosting Sacred Conversations, using art of hosting practices within particularly United Church, but church contexts in general. And so one of the, at least one of the most experienced art of hosting people that I know personally is Chris Corrigan. And Chris is with us today, and we're just thrilled to have Chris join us. Let's say hello, Chris, and then you'll be full screen for people in speaker view.
Hey, good morning. For me, it's morning. I'm on the west coast of Canada, just on a little island near Vancouver. So good morning.
So we're in the safe to fail experimenting mode, and one of the things that we're going to experiment with today in a few minutes is singing together. And so we're going to try that, in which case you'll want to unmute your microphones so that we will be able to hear each other. We'll see how that goes. The words to the song will be in the Google Doc, but before that I'm going to ask Allan to begin this short time of devotion and worship time together.
Thanks, Joe. Just want to invite everyone to enter into this space, this space that we've created, this sacred space. People often say that they prefer in-person meetings, but I'd like to invite you to bring yourself into this space, this sacred space. And in the divine, we are interconnected, and there is no distances between us, but we are together. So I invite you to just ground yourself with a few deep breaths, plant your feet, and I'll give you a few words of blessing from John O'Donohue, his poem, For Longing. Blessed be the longing that brought you here and quickens your soul with wonder. May you have the courage to listen to the voice of desire that disturbs you when you have settled for something safe. May you have the wisdom to enter generously into your own unease and discover the new direction your longing wants you to take. May the forms of your belonging here in love, creativity, and friendship be equal to the grandeur of the call of your soul. Welcome, folks. So Joe, have you got your guitar handy there? Are you going to bring us into song? Folks, I don't know if you've all found the chat bar. If you go to the bottom menu of your screen, it says chat, and if you click on that, you'll get a dialogue opportunity there. So Joe, were you going to put the lyrics there? Or I think our lyrics are pretty simple, eh?
The lyrics are actually on the Google Doc.
Oh.
We're just doing a chorus from a song that does have more verses, but so it's called My Soul is Thirsting for You. All right, so I'll invite everybody to unmute themselves, and I'll sing this. We'll sing it through, I don't know, let's say 4 times, and if you don't know it, you'll pick it up and you can start joining in with me, okay? Goes like this. My soul is thirsting for you, my God, thirsting for you, my God. My soul is thirsting for you, my God, thirsting for you, my God, thirsting for you, my God. Is that coming through?
Yeah.
Yeah, we got it. You hearing the guitar?
Yep, we got the
You
guitar.
might need to mute your speakers coming back, though.
Mute my speakers?
Yeah, so because as soon as I start singing, you fade out.
Oh. I can live with that. I will mute my speakers. Okay, so we're going to sing it through about 3 times, and we just thought it was a good song to open with, given that we are thirsting for something new and something that's full of life today, and we're asking God to fill us with that. So let's sing this together.
Also, one of our mottos is it has to be fun.
My soul is thirsting for you, thirsting for you, my God. My soul is thirsting for you, my God.
Thirsting for you, my God. Thirsting for you, my God.
My soul is thirsting for you, my God.
Thirsting for you, my God. My soul for you, my God. Thirsting for you, my God.
My soul is thirsting for
Soul thirsting for you, my God. Thirsting for you, my God. Soul thirsting for you, my God. Thirsting for you, my God.
Nice.
Make a joyful noise.
Joyful noise is right. Yeah.
He was around.
I declare that a complete success in the category.
So I did mute my speaker, so I didn't hear people.
There is a noticeable lag, which
It
creates
was like a that's what I thought might happen.
Okay.
We're recording this, so I'll get to listen to the recording later.
I'm glad we're not doing the verses as well.
Well, check it on YouTube later. It should get a lot of hits. All right. Well, we're going to take a few minutes now to use that Google Doc, and some of you keeners have gotten a head start on it. But if you look at the document, the Google Doc, you'll see that the couple of things. One is that you can maneuver your way quickly around the document by using the little bookmarks that I've put in it. If you click on a bookmark and then on the bookmark link, it'll take you to where you need to be. So the first place is in the check-in. And we want you to just pick a spot, a slot, and answer the question, who am I and why am I here? And we'll give you about 5 minutes to post something there. And then we'll take another few minutes to give you to read what others have written. So let's do that now.
I'm still on the Zoom screen. How do I get to Google Docs from here?
Do you have the Google Docs opened, Terry?
No. How did I open it? How do I?
Okay. The Google Doc was sent out in the reminder email, but it's also in the chat. So if you go down to the bottom of your screen and click on the chat window, open up the chat window. There is Allan has posted near the top of it a Google Doc link. It's
Okay, that's the
jr-inc.ca HSC 022818. That's the one. So if you click on that, it'll open up the Google Doc, and you can start to type in your responses to that question: who am I and why am I here?
Joe, it's great to see we're getting a range of people from across the country. One of our goals with this project that's been sponsored by EDGE is to develop a cross-country network of practitioners in the United Church, people who find value in using these art of hosting tools. So this is our second in a series, and we've got 2 more coming each one is the fourth Wednesday in the month. So yeah, it's great to see you all. Quite a list of people. It's interesting to read through. Quite a variety of people from different places. Joe, are you going to take us into the next piece?
Yes, I am. I was just getting caught up in reading all of those, and some folks were still typing, so I was anxiously waiting to see what they were going to type next. Again, it's just a thrill to have Chris join us all the way from Bowen Island on the sunny West Coast. And Chris, I met Chris, I think we met for the first time, Chris, when Conference Personnel Ministers had an event in Nanaimo, maybe. It was a few years ago. And it was really that that was my first introduction to realizing that a lot of the kinds of things that I had been exposed to in a variety of other places were coming together under this one, kind of in this one container called the art of hosting. And it was in part stemming from that has kind of led me to this place here today. So it's, I'm grateful to Chris at a personal level for that. And Chris has been at this for a few decades, which is quite a bit longer than many of us have been. So we're turning it over to Chris. Chris has been one of the things that Chris has created is something that's called the chaotic stepping stones, and I'll let him say more about that. But really appreciate having you here, Chris. And I guess I'll just launch into it by asking you to tell us a bit about that work and particularly the idea of sensing needs leading into practice. And if we have some questions pop up in the chat area, then Allan can toss those in as we go along. So over to you, Chris.
Great. Well, good morning. Still morning for me. It's about 10:30 here on the West Coast. And yeah, Joe, thank you. It's actually a gift to be here. I was United Church member here on Bowen Island, was originally way back when I was 18, 19 years old, angling for a job in the church as a minister. That was a calling I had. Was at the General Council in 1986 when we made the apology to Native congregations, and that set me off on a completely different path in my life. And so for the rest of the last 30 years, I've been working a lot with Indigenous communities in the space between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities as a facilitator and community developer and leadership trainer and stuff like that. And came back into the church about 2009 when I started working with the Fraser Presbytery here in BC and some of the churches that were amalgamating around here. So so I have a kind of a long history of working with the United Church, and have worked with many churches and a lot in BC Conference as well over the last little while. With this art of hosting, with what we call the art of hosting approach and practices to these kinds of conversations, and really bringing them into spaces of sacredness. So the chaotic stepping stones is an interesting tool. I'm going to actually share my screen here. I'm going to show you a couple of diagrams here that are going to help to understand a little bit what I'm talking about. So the first one is this word chaotic. Let's start with that one. So the word chaotic was a word that was created by a guy by the name of D. Hawk. And if you don't know who D. Hawk is, you're probably sitting on him right now, because if you've got a Visa card in your back pocket, he was the guy that created the Visa organization. And he wrote a great book called The Birth of the Chaotic Age. back in the 60s, when he was being tasked with the idea of with the job of creating a credit card for the world, he decided, when you're creating a currency, you need to have an organizational structure that has some form and order, but also has little bit of chaos built in, emergence, so that people can come and go. And he described this space between chaos and order as chaotic, and he was the one that created this portmanteau of a term. And this diagram here, in the Art of Hosting community, we, some of the folks that began that community in 1999, were meeting with D. Hawk, and they kind of characterized it not just as a space between chaos and order, but actually as a path. This is a place where we walk in all the time. And in any form of leadership, especially the kinds of leadership you guys are doing, you'll recognize this space here. The dance between chaos and order is cosmological. It's, the whole Old Testament is about the chaotic path. And so basically, what you have is this interlocking between chaos and order. And at the far ends of both of these, you have control and chamos, the Greek word chamos. So control is when you tip too far into order and you start controlling things, out of fear, out of anxiety, out of a desire to just get a hold on it, because emergence is scary. It's funny, like we thirst for God, and then God shows up, and then we try and create a strategic plan. So and accountabilities and presbyteries and things like that. So this tendency to want to go into control and to want to manage things is a very strong tendency in our culture. And again, the Old Testament is full of stories where people got it wrong, got surprised. On the far side of the other side of chaos is chamos. So D. Hawk was using the word chaos very much in the way that people used it in the 1960s to refer to that kind of place of not yet formed order, where order can arise, self-organization can arise. So when I say it's cosmological, it's sort of in that field of chaos theory, but it also very much drifts into the world of the sacred. If you've read Stuart Kaufman's work lately, you'll recognize that he identifies the sacred as that space of emergence. Chamos is a Greek word meaning kind of like despair, or a friend of mine, a Greek friend of mine, says, who is the one that gave us this word into this model, says that we're Greek, so we have a number of words for things that are worse than chaos, because there are states that are like that, and chamos is the worst. So it's like the fiery, sticky pit of despair, the thing you can never get out of. Complete destruction, nothing's going anywhere. So what's interesting about these two things, just to notice, is as we're trying to create conversations and actions that are working in a space of emergence, where we have lots of people involved, we have lots of diversity in the room, we want emergence to occur. We can't have too much control or too much chaos. We have to do this little balance between the two. And this is actually what I think is a really powerful way of characterizing the kind of calling, the kind of leadership that's called for right now. I talk about it as chaotic confidence. Staying on the chaotic path requires some stepping stones, because there's lots of stuff that's going to knock you off it, and a lot of that has to do with your own emotions, your own anxieties, and so on and so forth. So over the years, as we've said that there's a value in the chaotic path. There's a value in walking this space between chaos and order, bringing form when we need it, breaking the form when we don't need it anymore, when it doesn't serve, creating new form, breaking it again, creating new form, and breaking it again. I think this is the story of the church in the last 2,000 years, is basically what's been happening. Like spirit is emergent. The form in which we contain spirit in community constantly changes. We bring in order, it becomes atrophied, too controlled, breaks apart, and something new occurs. And then we bring some form and control there. So this is not to say that order and chaos one is better than the other. It's to say that in walking, we don't walk by putting our left foot and our right foot and our left foot and our right foot. We walk by moving between those poles to keep on a path. And the path of emergence is the one we need to learn how to cultivate. So in working with this path of emergence, the folks in the Art of Hosting community over many years, working initially with D. Hawk's initial framework of chaotic lenses, came up with this. And I'll show you this one. So share the screen with you. This is the chaotic stepping stones. Everybody see that? Just give me a thumbs up. You get that, Joe? You can see the chaotic stepping stones? Okay, great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the chaotic stepping stones here. So if this path of chaos in order is like we're walking this path, we need something that's going to help us stay on it. And what we've developed over the years, and this is definitely my version of it, what we've developed over the years is these 9 chaotic stepping stones. And I use these chaotic stepping stones all the time to plan conversations and to plan strategic initiatives as we're moving forward here. So let's see. Yes, you will get the handout. Thank you, New Scoop. So, in fact, if you go on my website, I'll maybe Joe can type it in right now. If you go on my website, chriscorrigan.com, there's a 9-page guide to using this tool. So not only will you get this handout, you'll get a whole guideline to using this. But I'm going to walk you through it kind of at a surface level, and then we'll think and talk about it. Originally, Dee Hock said when he created the Visa organization, they really had 6 stepping stones. It said any organizational initiative that needs to be created where you're going to have this flow, but you also need form, needs to have purpose and principles identified, as well as the people who are going to be a part of it. It also needs to have structure, practice, and a concept, a structure, and a practice for doing it. And over the years, we've kind of morphed these out into these 9 stepping stones. And so this tends to work at many different levels. So whether you're planning a meeting or planning a longer term strategic initiative or planning a complete systemic change, I've worked at it at every level with the chaotic stepping stones. And this is the basic way that I do planning. You can use this tool in a linear way, which is how I'm going to guide you through it. You can also use it in a non-linear way. For example, if you're listening to a congregation or listening to a presbytery or a group of people who are describing to you a situation, you can use this to listen and map where they're at in terms of these different bits and pieces. And this is also a very useful tool for working with core teams. All of the work I do in the chaotic space is working with core teams of people. So I never work alone. It's fundamentally, when we're working with complex problems, working alone is not a good idea. So you always want to work with a diversity of opinion, a diversity of ideas, and a diversity of perspectives. And the chaotic stepping stones helps us to create the kinds of conversations that we need to have to steward strategic initiatives as they're moving forward. So the core team of people that I work with, always, we're the ones that are constantly looking at the need and the purpose. We come back to that all the time. If you're the kind of person that thinks that talking about purpose endlessly is a bad idea, then you're probably not fit for a core team. But the job of a core team is to really hold the heartwood of an organization or an initiative, so that whatever grows out from that, if you think about the way a tree grows, it grows out from the heartwood, not up from the ground. So it grows out from the inside. So the integrity of the inside really matters. And this structure helps us focus on what's the inside of our work. So let me go through these stepping stones in order, and then we can talk about them a little bit. The first piece of work that I do with any group that I'm working with is get a sense of why we need to do this. As a facilitator, I often have people send me an agenda and say, here's the agenda, can you come and facilitate our meeting? And my common response to that is to invite them to slow down, and like a first date usually looks like dinner and a movie before we get to the action. This is a bit presumptuous that I'm going to rush right to your agenda. And the reason for that is because I think many of us don't think through why we're even meeting, or why we're even undertaking a strategic initiative, or why we're even having this conversation. So getting a sense of the need is really important. And the need and the purpose work together kind of hand in glove. The need is simply a statement of what's real right now. What's urgent in our field? What's the conversation that's begging to be had? What are the dynamics that we need to deal with? Is it a conflict? Is it the wrapping up of a court? Is it an amalgamation that's present? There's always something urgent in the field. One of my favorite questions for discerning the need is just like, what time is it right now? What is absolutely top of mind? What's the most important thing we need to talk about? And the important thing about need is that the need really describes your current state. Like getting a handle on the need, whether it's you individually or you with a little core team of people, is really about you figuring out reality. It's not really something you get to choose. You don't get to choose the need. You really want to discern what the need is. You follow what I'm saying? What you do get to do is you get to choose the purpose, which is the direction of travel. So given the need, where do we want to go together? What do we want to do? What's the direction we want to go in? Or if you're dealing with something simpler, what's the actual goal at the end of the day we're hoping to achieve? When we're working in a linear, predictive way where there's a finish line, maybe we're building a building or creating a budget or something like that, that's what we call a complicated problem, and that has a goal. You can make a goal, and then you can achieve a goal. When you're working with something more complex, more emergent, like a community, resolving a conflict, working on a social justice issue that doesn't have an end, right? We're not going to have a racist-free world if we just follow the strategic plan, for example. We're not going to have a spiritual community that's active and vibrant by April, and then we don't have to worry about it anymore. These are ongoing, emerging things. So your purpose when you're dealing with complex, emergent topics is to get a sense of the direction of travel. Which way do we want to go? It's like if I were to reference it scripturally, it's really like quo vadis, like where are you going? And getting a sense of that purpose over time is really important. So need and purpose form the core of all the work you're going to do. And if you don't spend time talking about it, and you don't spend time getting clear on the shared need and the shared purpose, you can go off in a million different directions with strategic initiatives and conversations that are incredibly unsatisfying. Okay, so need and purpose, very important. And as you discern these together and you have that first conversation, it then becomes really clear that you're going to be needing to introduce more people and involve more people in what it is that you're doing. So getting a sense of who the people are is a much different task when you've identified what the need is and what the purpose is than if you just randomly throw a bunch of Post-it notes at the wall and say, these are cool people, we should invite them together. They're going to want to know why. They're going to want to know why you chose them. They're going to want to know what you're doing. So, definitely invite your people in, but make sure that they're the right people for the job. And the job is the purpose based on the need, rested in the need. And then the other thing you get to choose is you get to choose the principles. The principles are how we work together. So what do you want to say about how it is that we're going to work together? What do you want to say about some of the ways in which we're bound and some of the ways in which we're not bound? Are we going to conduct our conversations according to Christian principles of communication, or is this just a business meeting? I mean, I was working with a church one time where they began, it was a very difficult board meeting that they were about to have. And so the minister began with a prayer, and the board chair interrupted her in the middle of the prayer and said, we don't have time for this. We've got business to do. And that was the beginning of the end for her as a minister of that church, right? It's just like, oh, I'm sorry, this is a church. This is where we pray. And our act of being together is sacred and holy, not a business meeting, right? You want to run a business? Go run a business, go get involved in a nonprofit. But to interrupt her in telling, I mean, just like, can we agree on the principles here? This is a church where living in community is a spiritual practice. And those principles can be very firm. They can be boundaries across which you don't cross. And they can also be very open. So in other words, principles around we value listening and diversity of opinion, which means that if I'm not hearing a diversity of opinion, I'm going to ask for contrary views. So the levels of invitation down here, the types of invitation, take more than one form, make it a personal connection. So the idea here is that all the way through this process, the chaotic stepping stones are designed to give you moves that you can make that are participatory and engaging. And my assumption here is you're using this to develop engaging processes. So as you go, you need to be engaging at every level. And that means an invitation, the worst kind of invitation is an email, say, hey, come to this meeting, right? Much better to be reaching out to the people you feel are there, need to be there, to ask them personally to come, to tell them why they're needed, to connect their presence to the need and the purpose of what you're trying to do, to share with them the principles. The inviting phase I really focus on a lot because it's actually the thing we do the least of when we're planning. We do lots of stuff around implementing. We do lots of stuff around how to get structure around things. We don't spend enough time on the need and purpose. And I will tell you that the success of any participatory initiative depends on how much time you spend working the need and purpose. If it's a good quality, clear calling, people will come because they know why they're needed. Okay, so that's the first piece. The second chunk is implementing. Now, you might think that it would be logical for us to go from an invitation to designing a structure to implementing something. But I am here to tell you that that often ends up with facilitators walking home from a meeting with a bunch of flip charts rolled up under their arms and no idea what they're going to do next. So in order to disabuse us of that pattern, when I'm planning and we have a good solid invitation put together, the very next question I ask a group of people is like, how are we going to use what we've created? So A, what are we going to create? What are our outputs? And B, what's our architecture of implementation? So there's two pieces to think about here. Outputs are tangible and intangible. Every meeting is productive. It produces something. It could produce a report, a set of minutes, a graphic recording, a video, clarity, right? Something that in hand we can walk away with. It also creates intangible stuff. It creates relationship, it creates can create community, can create relationship, can create commitment. As a meeting designer and a host, you need to pay attention to both the tangible and the intangible products of a meeting. One of my basic operating principles as a facilitator is leave more community than you found, right? So if I can create a meeting in which people coming to that meeting will leave feeling like, despite whatever we've accomplished together, that we're more community at the end than we were at the beginning, that actually gives us a much better success for moving forward. And especially if it's a crappy meeting and we don't accomplish anything, if we still feel tight at the end of it, it gives us a much better chance of being able to continue on doing the work. The worst kind of meetings for me are like public meeting. You ever been to a public meeting in your town hall, in your municipality or something, where maybe you do this in your church as well? And basically the structure of these kinds of meetings is that we set up a table at the front of the room, right? And then we set up rows of chairs. And at the table at the front of the room, we put maybe 3 or 4, we'll call them targets. And then in the rows of chairs, we're going to fill the rows of chairs with what we call ammunition, like angry taxpayers. And then we put like 3 weapons in the aisles. We call those microphones. And then we line up the ammunition in the microphones, like every aisle becomes a magazine, and we just fire at the targets. And at the end of the day, those kinds of meetings are horrible. They deplete our social capital. They create civic despair, right? They undermine the democratic process. They're terrible kinds of meetings. And you might get somewhere, you might actually advance the development proposal or something, but at the end of the day, what you've sacrificed to do that is precious, right? So never sacrifice the intangible at the altar of a clear strategic plan. If you're really doing participatory work, you're going to need people to be with you. If you piss people off, they're going to leave. And if they leave, you've got nothing to work with. So tangible and intangible need deep focus. You need to be focused on both of those things, not during the meeting, before the meeting, okay? Before the meeting starts. This is all part of the design work. Okay, what are the tangible and intangible outputs that we're going to be producing together? And what's the architecture of implementation? How are we going to use this? If we take the time to create something, what resources, power, influence, capacity, that do we need in order to make it continue and move onward? Nobody likes to come to a meeting or a conference or a retreat where we're supposed to be producing something practical and useful, and we go back and nothing changes. So as you design with the end in mind. Like it's like in martial artists. So if you're a martial artist and you're training to break a board, for example, you don't chop your hand where it hits the board. You actually go through the board. So you aim through and past what it is you're trying to work with. And that's true of designing this kind of stuff. So have a sense of what your implementation plan is. Now, that doesn't mean that things won't evolve and change in the meeting or in the strategic process that you're engaged in, but at least begin with a sense of like, here's at the basic level, our tangible and intangible outputs, and here's how we're going to use it and what will support our action going forward. All of that can also be built into the invitation as well. So we have a strong sense of people coming to the meeting know you're serious about using what it is that they produce. Okay, so those are those 2 stepping stones, the implementing piece. And then finally, the last one I'll talk about here is the structuring piece. So once you've got your need and purpose, your people are identified, your principles are clear, you know what you're producing, you know how you're going to use it, now it's time to actually design. Now I can look at an agenda, right? So I'm going to start not by actually going to the hardcore, okay, what are we going to do at each time in a meeting? I want to get a concept. Are we going to do a participatory meeting? Is this going to be a workshop? Are we going to go for a long walk on the land together? What's the basic concept we're going to use here. Is it going to be participatory, or are we going to bring in experts to preach and lecture? Identifying your concept before nailing it down too much helps you to surface your limiting beliefs, helps you to surface the fears. So if you say, yeah, I think the way we're going to deal with this new presbytery structure is that we're going to get 30 people to sit in a circle and talk about it for a day, that's actually a really wise thing to do, but that's going to trigger a lot of people. Like, honestly, it's going to trigger a lot of people. So getting out some of those, if it feels like a structure like a well-held circle is what you need to do for a full day to deal with the big issues around your presbytery reorganization, then you're better to get your fears and limiting beliefs about how that's going to go out of the way before you plan the structure, rather than actually deciding on an agenda and building in your fears into your structure and agenda anyway. What I find is, especially when we're doing this work with participatory work, where we're trying to bring lots of multiple voices in, working with open space, world cafes, circle work, where voices matter and we're making space for voices. That's the essence of creating chaotic leadership. The problem is that lots of people get freaked out by it. And we just, for whatever reason, we say, you know what, actually, we're going to predetermine the topics people are going to talk about. That happens all the time in open space. Or in World Cafe, I just don't think it's going to work if we don't have a facilitator at every table, which is complete bunk, because human beings know how to converse. But somehow we feel this need to want to control things. And when that happens and we tip into that control side of the chaotic stepping stones, and we do it unconsciously because we're working out of fears or an unstated assumption about control, or I have to manage the conflict before it comes up, right? As if talking about conflict is a bad thing, or as if dealing with it openly is a bad thing. Then you're going to be building your fears into the structure. So I like the structuring conversation to start with a high-level concept that opens up and identifies our limiting beliefs so that we can identify and bring those up and talk about them. What makes us tremble? What assumptions do we have? What judgments do we have about ourselves or the people that are coming? What are our fears about it? Dealing with that allows us to be much more resilient in working with our structure and to stay on the chaotic path, so we can create a structure that allows for emergence rather than allowing for rather than controlling the outcomes too much. Nobody likes to be controlled. Nobody likes to be led down a garden path. Nobody likes to be sold a bill of goods that this is a participatory process and your views matter, but you have to come up with the answers we've already come up with. And to some degree, that happens all the time. So using the chaotic stepping stones helps you as a core team to plan working in complexity and keep your focus on both the visible stuff you need to do and the invisible stuff. In every level here, there's an invisible piece of work you need to look at. The need is often invisible. Some of the principles are often invisible. The intangible outputs, like focusing on those invisibles, the limiting beliefs. The invisible is what often tips you off the chaotic path and into control or chamos on the other side. So naming the invisible, tying it to the visible, and doing good design work like that will help you to create strategic processes, participatory meetings that actually keep you in that space of generative emergence rather than tipping you one way or the other. So I'll stop there for the moment and say hi. Here I am. And I don't know, where do you want to go from here, Joe?
That's great, Chris. What we're going to do is break people into groups of 4 to have some conversation and about what they've just heard. And but before we do that, let's just first of all give people a chance to unmute themselves and just ask if there's any point of clarification that people would like to have. We don't want to kind of debate or discuss we'll leave that for our groups of 4 to have that kind of conversation. But if going into that group of 4, is there anything that Chris has said that you just didn't really understand and would like just a bit more for him to say a little bit more about it? So unmute yourself. I guess we'll try just unmuting. There we go. Is anything that, just one last chance, speak up, say, yes, I have something to ask.
I have a question.
Okay.
Judith, can you hear me okay?
Yep. Again, yeah.
So I got in the implementation phase, I heard lots about the tangible and intangible outputs. What I missed was the architecture of implementation.
Right. So the idea there is, let me maybe tell you a quick story here. I was working on a large conference one time with the National Aboriginal Forestry Association, 10 years after the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples reported. So they reported in 96, and in 2006, a group of people involved in forestry, including companies, First Nations, workers, education institutions, were looking at the recommendations in that report around forestry and realizing that nobody had implemented them, right? It'd been 10 years. I mean, this is what happens with Royal Commissions, right? So they decided to call a conference to create implementation plans. And I thought that was great. So I talked to my client and I said, so what are we going to do? Well, we're going to have this conference. We're going to break into about 24 little groups. We're going to work on these plans. We'll bring them into plenary, talk about what we're doing. At the end, we're going to produce a report full of implementation plans so that people can go away and implement the recommendations. And I said, that's great. And then what happens? Well, then we just produce a report and then people will pick it up and implement them. And I went, awesome. That's exactly what the Royal Commission did. Right? So that's when I coined the term architecture of implementation. And I asked her, like, what can we build around the outputs from our conference that will make it last? And so she went away for 2 weeks and she came back and she said, oh, I've got a UN working group. I've got a parliamentary standing committee. I've got a forest sector products council meeting. I've got an advisory committee. I've got some educators. Like, people are actually now waiting for us to have the report because they put it on their agendas. And that really changed the notion, that the invitation to the meeting, right? You can imagine people came and we said, come and produce these implementation reports because this UN working group on the rights of Indigenous peoples is about to implement them in terms of, international agreements, or this sector council is about to implement them in terms of labor force development, right? And they don't know what they're going to implement yet. We get to make the implementation plans, but they're already on their agenda for meetings following our conference. That's what I mean by an architecture of implementation. It gives you a place where people with power, resources, and influence are waiting for your work to be done so that you can implement it. So it's not just, oh, here's the meeting and then we're done. You think about like all the stuff that's happened in this church in the last little while. I think there's like a need has been well identified, right? The engagement work has been well identified. I'm not sure the architecture of implementation has been really consistent all the way along. I mean, that may be true. It may not be. Different conferences may be in better shape than others. But how do we actually implement what people come up with, right? If we knew there were resources, if we knew there was time, if we knew there was like openness to different ways of organizing and being, that might change the way we're doing our work. So that's what I mean by architecture of implementation. Any other questions?
So I'm creating a question, Chris, for our small group. And what I'm suggesting we ask people to discuss in the groups of 4 are what invitation might you make to your leaders to begin this intensive planning process? So how would you get your leaders to spend this intensive amount of time in pre-planning the event? Or what questions might you use to engage them?
Yeah, that's great. If you've got work you guys are dealing with, this is a really good way to ground some of this.
So so to begin, how does that sound? Any questions about that question? Does that give you a place to start discussing? How would you?
Let's put them into the small groups, and it's just like your initial reaction to this kind of stuff, and then I think the invitation piece is really strong. Like, what would you name as your need and purpose, and how would you engage folks in that? So, yeah, let's go into the small groups, and people it'll be more real for you to engage there, and then if there's any questions coming out, maybe we can deal with them then.
Great.
So I'll just say that. As Allan's question is a good one. So beginning with the invitation piece, there's a principle that often we use in participatory work, which is that the conversation begins long before the meeting starts and ends long after the meeting is over. So it's in a way, like, imagine what you're creating with this tool is like an amplification of an echo. We come into this space where there's echoes in the field. There's like strong and urgent needs. If you can identify those urgent needs, then the meeting or an engagement process helps you to amplify and look for ways forward. And then that makes an impact that over time, though, you know, a meeting, even a small meeting, has an impact over time. How you support and amplify, you know, that music that's been created together is a really important piece. So I want you to think about this as designers. Think about that you're not doing kind of a linear, you know, it's not like producing spaghetti from wheat. It's more like listening for a whisper, creating a song, and then seeing how it carries out into community. It's more like that. You're creating moments of influence. So with that in mind, then maybe how you engage in the invitation might and who gets in the room and how you name your need and purpose might shift a little bit what we're looking at. Don't think so much in terms of goals. It's always tempting to think in terms of a goal, like vision, mission, goals, objectives. Don't think so much in terms of that way of planning. Think more about like, what's a direction of travel we want to go in and how do we know we're going there? And why?
Okay.
Is that enough, Joe?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Chris. So Allan, you've typed the new question in the Google Doc?
Yeah, that's right. It's it's up a few. So what invitation might you make to leaders to begin the planning process, like as Chris was describing there? Okay. So what's the urgent need? How do you identify that?
Okay. So we'll put you into groups, and I'll give you a notice a minute before, when there's a minute left. I'll send you a notice that the time in the small groups will end, and we'll give you about 12 or 13 minutes, something like that, in your small groups to have this conversation with each other.
Right. And we're inviting people to, once again, use the Google Doc. If someone would take on the role of scribe and try to capture some of the conversation highlights or harvests, who's in your group, and just even some of the points that you pick up. And that would be great to have those recorded in the Google Docs for everyone to take a look at. That's
right. And we'll share this with everyone. And send you all out a link later on. So the groups are numbered in the Google Doc. There's spaces in there with numbers. The number, just pick a number, and the numbers just to help you, each other in your group, find a spot. You can take some notes. And so I guess with that, everyone's all set. We'll break into breakout rooms, and then we'll notify you when it's time to come back. Welcome back, everyone.
Thank you.
All right.
Mute your mics.
Everybody, please mute. So what we're going to do is give you a chance to just give us any insights or any questions that came out of your conversations together, and we'll give Chris a chance to respond to those. And what I'm going to do is ask you to, very obviously, like this, kind of right up to the screen, raise your hand if you'd like to speak, and then we can unmute you. I'll do the unmuting.
Okay.
Or if you're not on video, then just holler.
Okay, Todd McDonald has a question. Well, there you go. You may have to unmute yourself there, Todd.
I do, yeah. Okay, thanks. It's actually an insight that I wanted to share with the whole group that came from the trinity of where Judith and of Allison and Marion, they're talking about a good question that they've used, which is what's on your heart today? Or and just I thought that was an important question with what time is it? What time is it might surface some of the stuff around what's going on, like what's the immediate concerns in the congregation, but then what's on your heart today. Get a little bit, connect mind and heart. So Chris, I just wondered what you thought about that insight that came from that group.
I think there's a sense somehow that the need, like an emotional field, that's what you're talking about. So it's like identifying personally what's on my heart, but making that visible collectively can name an emotional field that you need to be working with as well. That can be a very powerful question that way, for sure. So yeah, I mean, a whole bunch of different kinds of ways of discerning need, but that would be a good one. Mm-hmm.
Anyone else raise a hand?
There's a question from Wendy about the edge between setting goals and setting direction. It is tempting to start with goals. I'll just give you a quick thing. If what you're doing, Wendy, is creating a project that has an end to it in sight, then you can create a goal and you can use that as a target. In the complexity world, we call that complicated. Linear predictive planning will work. If you are doing something that does not have an end in sight, you're not creating a thing that has an end in sight in general, it's ongoing, it's emergent, none of us have the answers, then you're in the complex domain, and a goal is not going to help you. In fact, a goal is going to limit what is available to you as you scan options and include people. We think we love linear predictive planning, and we will go to our graves as a species with a pie chart on how successful we were in achieving our goals for our epitaph. So getting the right processes for the right problems is what we're really talking about here. You can use the chaotic stepping stones for both linear predictive planning as well as working in complexity, but it really comes down to the purpose. A goal is helpful when you're building a building, making a car, solving a problem that's more technical in nature. A direction of travel is much better when you're doing something that's adaptive, that's emergent, that's complex. Because and that can be guided by your heart field. So that can be guided not only by, Todd, your question about like what's on your heart is not only what's actually in your life right now that you feel moved by, but also what is good for us to do together, right? So when we're working in complexity, like a shared ethical, moral direction is very powerful, and counts as a purpose.
Yep. I see Ben had his hand up there, and Terry.
Yeah, hi, this is Ben. You'll get to see more of me next month, but I have a concrete example of just what Chris was saying. So I'm with a Unitarian congregation that's been trying to work in these ways for about 2 years. We've had about 10 gatherings at this point on a variety of themes. And I'll give one specific example. So like lots of congregations, we need more volunteers in our children's program. And instead of holding another committee meeting to talk about how we can recruit more volunteers to our children's program, we backed off to a wider view, and we held a gathering for all ages in the congregation on the question, what are the most essential experiences that we want our children to have during their time in this congregation? And what are the most essential experiences that you had as a kid? And that led to a really rich exploratory conversation from which a number of clear themes emerged that wouldn't have emerged from a conversation just about our program as it currently exists.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome, Ben.
Yeah, I love the going to the experiential, right, and getting people to share from their heart. So that's great. What about Terry?
The timing is perfect. Richmond Hill United Church, where I am, has been going through a planning process for 18 months, and we're just heading towards the final step of this, which is what's known as the consensus step, where we meet with all the congregation to say, here's all the things we've heard, here's all the things you've said, here's all the things you want to do. Now, how do we decide what we will do amongst those? And I know that the way we were heading was to create this list of goals, list of values, and say, go through and mark which ones are important to you. And what I'm hearing today says, no. This has to be conversations, out of which comes the marking of the cheats to say, here's what therefore emerges. Because without the conversation, there's a whole pile of people that are not feeling they've engaged in it, they're not satisfied with it, and they don't buy into what we then need to do. So thank you for today.
Great, great. Chris, did you want to add anything to that?
It's like Chris froze again. Must be fairies over at in the bay.
So we're just into our winding up time. I noticed a number of people have taken notes from your groups. We also would invite you, just in the last few minutes, it would just take 2 or 3 minutes, in the last section of that Google Doc, to name something you're taking away from this session today. Was there a word? Was there an image? Was there a particular key learning for you from today's session? If you would put them in to that last section in the Google Doc, we'll have a harvest of reactions. Can we take just 2 minutes to do that now? So maybe I'll just close. I'll finish that poem that I began at the beginning from John O'Donohue.
We won't sing again, though.
Yeah, I could try singing it. No, I don't think I will. Okay. May your dreams gradually reveal the destination of your desire. May a secret providence guide your thought and nurture your feeling. May your mind inhabit your life with the sureness with which your body inhabits the world. And may you come to accept your longing as divine urgencies. So we won't close with a song, but what if we tried on the count of 3, if we all unmute, and on the count of 3, we offer one another a blessing by just simply saying, be well. Can we try that?
Be well.
You will.
Now on the count of 3.
Oh,
The count of 3, all together. 1, 2, 3.
Be well.
Amen.
See you next month.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
bye.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks, Chris. Good to see you.
You too, Karen. Cheers.
Bye. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Good. Enjoy Ben next month.
See you next month.